Yes, Adjourn.
Everybody back? Okay, next item, item 2, is approval of the agenda. Any additions, deletions?
Move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. Item 3, discussion items. Item A, New Hanover County Schools Facilities. Dr. Markley.
All right, we're going to start this. You were here to take a tour here, but this isn't the only school in the district. We have 42. So I have asked our Public Information Office, I believe Audubon's direction, put together a video, and Aaron, who heads up our TV studio, has put together a very short 3-minute production to sort of give you a little bit of an overview of our district as a whole.
The Cape Fear Memorial Bridge and New Hanover County Schools have a lot in common. Both support a large amount of traffic, both provide passage to new destinations, and both must be safe. In other words, to fulfill their missions, both must have a strong foundation and infrastructure. Regular maintenance can keep both up and running, but time and use take their toll, and infrastructure must be addressed for them to continue to be viable components of New Hanover County. Currently, the traffic within the New Hanover County school system is on the rise. Once waning, the numbers are rising again, and older buildings are buckling. High schools in particular are seeing the effects of growth. Both Hoggard and Laney have suffered for years with gymnasiums that fail to meet the needs of increased student populations. Cafeterias, also designed for smaller student numbers, have become jammed during lunchtime. Technology has boomed in public school systems, providing teaching and learning experiences like never before. But technology has also created problems for schools built in the 60s and early 70s. They were not designed to support the large amount of cabling and power required to handle the ballooning use of technology in the classroom. Today, older schools look like spider webs with conduit running across ceilings and cables dangling from walls and across buildings. Electrical outlets are extremely scarce, and power strips loaded to the max occupy every classroom. 2 years ago, the school system launched a system-wide energy-efficient plan that has saved millions of dollars in operating costs. But at over a dozen of our older schools, it has been a struggle to save. HVAC systems, now 30-plus years old, are struggling, while hundreds of window units can no longer be repaired and must be replaced. Windows and their frames are cracked and broken. Double-pane windows, installed in the 70s and state-of-the-art for their time, have lost their seals and no longer provide any energy efficiency, or a view for that matter. In addition, aging roofs are leaking and patching efforts are starting to fail. Floors, the roadworks of the school system, are showing their age, with many hallways featuring a mosaic of tile types. Old tile and poor plumbing in bathrooms and kitchens are creating drainage issues. With larger student numbers come traffic issues at every school in the system. Both morning drop-offs and afternoon pickups are bumper-to-bumper affairs. Traffic patterns designed for much smaller student populations in what were once rural sections of the county are now serious problems hampering school safety. Safety is also of major concern. Schools like the one you're at feature open campuses. Students must go outside to move from classroom to media center to the cafeteria. Not only does this create dangers for school safety, but students must also deal with the elements. Teachers also struggle in this environment. This teacher is transporting a technology cart from its storage in the media center to one of the school's mobile units. These carts, which cannot be moved during rainy weather and are extremely heavy, require at least 2 teachers, one to lift from the inside and the other to push from the outside to move them over the thresholds of most classrooms. Classroom space is also an issue. Older schools have turned storage rooms into classrooms. With the use of movable dividers, others have created classrooms inside cafeterias. Currently, the New Hanover County school system has not 20 mobile units, 50 mobile units, but 80 mobile units in place to handle the growth in the student population. This is equivalent to having 4 completely built elementary schools. While mobile units do help relieve the strain on a school building, they are more expensive to maintain, less energy efficient, and provide less safety for students, and are subject to increased health concerns. New Hanover County Schools and the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge, both important and valuable institutions in the Cape Fear region, both requiring work on their superstructures in order to remain safe, trusted, and thriving parts of New Hanover County.
At this point, I'm going to run through a quick PowerPoint. I want to save as much time for discussion as possible, so if you have a question about any of these slides, please stop me and I'll answer them. But I'll move through these rather quickly so we can get to some of the main points. Facilities, so you know, 40 schools, 2 early college sites at UNCW and at Cape Fear, 3 administrative support buildings, 2 lease buildings, and we're probably going to reclaim both of those lease buildings in the next 2 years for class space. We currently lease to Wilmington Preparatory Academy. We'll take that back next year, and we also lease the J.C. Road building to a unit that provides mental health services for some of our older students, but we may have to reclaim that space as well. And then, of course, we've got 84 mobile units. Almost 3.5 million square feet of space, over 900 acres of campus space. School facility needs. We're required by state law to do a facility needs. You can see the general statute requires us to submit long-range plans. Mr. Hance and Mr. Anderson in our Facilities and Operations Division oversee the implementation of those plans. The survey considers capacity and enrollment, conditions of existing facilities, and then educational adequacy of existing facilities. So what it does, it looks at a building like this that was built in the 60s and says that building's still adequate for the current needs educationally. And then prioritize those needs on a 1 to 5 basis and a 6 to 10 year basis. So priority 1 to 5 years, critical needs, increased capacity, renovation to match curricular needs, modernization of aged infrastructure, building codes, technology improvements, deferred maintenance, and then energy efficiency. Folks, we went through some of the toughest economic times the last several years, and we deferred a lot of maintenance in order to keep our teachers in the building. That's coming back now to the point where we have to address that deferred maintenance. School capacity needs. For the first time ever, we're over 26,000 students in our district. If you look at our current enrollments, we are over by almost 2,000 at the elementary level, 400 at the middle school level, and another 1,100 at the high school level. You look at our projected membership, and this is from North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, we are rapidly approaching that 27,000, 28,000 number. School funding. This is the past history of our bond funding. 94 was a $39 million bond. We had a 96 state bond program, a 97 bond. 2005 was our last school bond that we took to a vote. Since 94 to 2005, and that span was about $342 million in construction. When you look at the use of those funds, how we're using those, most of it is new construction, and then renovation is the other part of it. Technology improvements, roof replacements. Athletics is a very small 2% part of that piece. Mobile units, and then some ADA improvements. We did get some qualified QZAB money, about $5 million. It was used for mostly upgrades, Bradley Creek roofing and HVAC, AC and electrical work. If you look at our annual capital funding, that's the year-to-year funding to keep up with maintenance. In 06-07, we were over $7 million. But we were receiving funds from 3 different sources at that time. There was a state tax that we got a portion of. There was local county money that came to us, as well as lottery funding. But after 2007, the state dollars went away. And for several years, the county dollars went away, and we were basically surviving on lottery funds to do our ongoing capital needs. We appreciate greatly the restoration of capital funds in last year's budget, as well as the technology money we've got in the last 2 years. But you can still, even in 11, 12, we're still well behind our peak at $7 million. And Mr. Hans can tell you, we could spend that $7 million just on roofs every year. So we did our last facility needs survey was 2010 and 11. That survey identified $390 million in needs. $102 million for new schools, 2.7 for land, over $250 million for renovations, and then another $15 million in just putting furniture in those buildings. So we did our facility needs, we updated it, we had at this point we looked at additional needs or changes. Our board held a retreat in January of this year to look at those needs, and then in July we came back and looked at those needs. And we prepared this list, which we'll come back to in a minute, where we had our total projected cost of needs, and that was $242 million in needs. So in summary, you can see that our membership goes up, our facility needs continue to go up, but our capital funding has dropped from 2007. So that's a quick view in terms of that. I'd like to move now and put up our priority list of items. And you'll find that as number 2 in your handout. This one. So even though with the state, we've identified, the state has a list that we just sent to the state of over $300 million in needs, we've actually gone through, pared that needs down to $244 million of identified priority needs. And we prioritize those 1 to 25. As I said, that's a list you see under tab 2 in your book. Now, I'm not going to go through those one by one and ask you to look at it. And are there any particular questions about any of those projects?
What would you look at putting a new elementary school?
Well, when you look at, if you're looking at an elementary school, not counting replacements. I mean, this would be a replacement school. Blair, Pine Valley would be replacement schools. Porter's Neck would be one area you would use, another one. And I would tell you long-term, outside of the range of this bond, probably another one in the south area along River Road at some point. But that's not in what I would say this first bond cycle. I think that's a further down the road piece. Priority-wise is at least one new elementary school and then replacement of 3 of the existing schools. So we can gain capacity with the new school and a little bit of capacity to the replacement of those 3 schools. As well as doing some renovations at other schools that may get us some capacity. If you look at Castle Lane, we've actually filled Castle Lane. There's not an empty classroom there. When you look at Freeman, Freeman is full. Schools that even last year or the year before, we had some space in. We're starting to see we're running out of space for those as well.
When you say a rolling rights, what are your plans in terms of renovations there?
Mr. Anderson?
Well, when we do our facility survey, and that was done back in 2010, 11, when in evaluating our existing facilities, we go through, we had architects, engineers, our own staff, and we went through and we categorized the buildings based on a list of questions looking at building systems and components. But we categorized these as major, moderate, or minor. And based on those 3 categories with the square foot cost applied to it. In simple terms, the minor needs are repairs, the major needs are complete replacement, and moderate needs are somewhere in between.
All right, I'd ask you to continue forward to the next one, which is the July 2nd. And that was basically taking that January list, looking at it one more time after the budget was done, and doing a little bit of prioritizing. So it's very similar to the January list, but that's our most current priority list right there, the July list. And you'll find that behind tab 4 is a project description for all of those projects to give you a little more detail about each project.
That's tab 4. Yeah, well, I know. But all the descriptions are in the back of the book. Well, send them an email and tell them. But yeah, I mean, all the descriptions in the back.
So as you look at that list, it's on the past tab 3. New elementary is first. College Park replacement is number 2. And then you start to see a number of district-wide infrastructure improvements, as well as flare replacement and some additions to our high schools, all the way down through number 25, which is Pine Valley and Williams replacement. So as you look at that, in 2013 dollars, that's $242 million in identified capital needs.
And looking at the gyms in Hargan and Laney, what's their seating capacity now?
If you remember from the video, one was 1,200, I think the other one was 800, for schools that are numbering over almost 2,000 students.
It's 850 for Hoggard, and I think there's 1,600 students.
And to be clear, the old gyms would remain as auxiliary gyms,
Correct.
which New Hanover has an auxiliary gym and Ashley has an auxiliary gym, so it would bring Hoggard and Laney up to the same status that Ashley and New Hanover have.
When those schools were first built, the gyms were too small. As well as when you go into the cafeterias, I think Hoggard's running 4 lunches now, Laney's running either 4 or 5 lunch periods right now.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Ask a question. Dr. Martin, the new elementary school, G22, is that the southern elementary school that you're speaking of?
Yes.
Okay.
So as you look at this in terms of new schools, 2 new elementaries, and then replacement of 4 existing schools on this list. And then renovations at a number of other schools.
Could you say a couple of comments, Dr. Markley, about, for example, Williams? You know, we're looking at this school, but if you're looking at this school, then you're also looking at, say, Mary C. Williams building the pod type of design and the concerns we have about Blair and Pine Valley.
Sure.
The concerns there.
When you look at the replacement school, this one is a pod school, built in the 60s. Mary C. Williams was built about the same time. Instead of octagon shapes, theirs are more square pods, but they have the same issues in terms of different pods, older buildings, smaller bathrooms, smaller hallways, safety concerns in terms of where they're located. When you look at Pitt, Blair, and Pine Valley, we had looked at, would it be cheaper to put an outside hallway and renovate those schools? And long-term, the cost differential is so close that it's actually, replacement makes more sense than simply trying to renovate and retrofit those schools. Because if you saw from the video, those are all outside doors. They were built in the 70s, and at that time, safety wasn't the issue that it is today. But right now, every single door, every single classroom door at those schools opens outside.
So a school like this will be redone, will you just go up as opposed to out?
Well, what we would look at is Castle Hayne was the newest school that we built. We'd like to take Castle Hayne and use that as a sort of a prototype model for all the new elementary schools. We think we can save some money on design costs by using the same design with slight modifications based upon the sites that they're going to be built at. Bill, anything you want to add about that?
No, that's what we would look at. You'd have to cite it at it, and we've done that in the past. Actually, Freeman was built 3 separate times. Freeman is Anderson and Murrayville are clones of Freeman with slight modifications for the sites. And so we can do that and look and see what we need at each one of those particular sites. It may be that we determine that on one particular site we do want to go up for a second floor or for some reason, but otherwise we can clone with modifications to the design.
I would assume you would build in the safety,
Yes, if you walk in,
commissioners there.
example, if you walk into Castle Lane, you have to walk into a small vestibule area that has one door in, and then you stop and have to go through another door before you can get into the building. So that was a school that was built with safety in mind. You can stand in that central part there at Castle Lane and look down 3 corridors. So in terms of supervision, much better. You could have one person supervise 3 corridors here. I need 3 people for 3 pods. So it's a whole different kind of layout there.
And also, I would just throw in, Dr. Markley, that under the last building that we did when we replaced Snipes, for example, that was a strong consideration to just, but the safety concerns there, the back buildings and so forth, and with cost of construction, it was just about the same price, just tear it down and build on that footprint there versus trying to renovate what was there, and we're running into that now also.
When you look at Pine Valley and Blair Center, it's about the same to take the schools down to rebuild.
I would also point out that in the bond issue that was approved, the $123 million bond issue, if you recall, John, you were on the board, I think, at the time. The school board came to the county commissioners and asked for $150 million. That would have included the work at Harvard and Laney. They were the next projects on our list. Cape Fear Community College came, asked for $27 million. And so $27 million was pulled out of the $150 that we had requested. Otherwise, the Harvard and Laney issues would not be in this request. They would have already been done.
Questions then about the process that we use to get here, to get our numbers and projects that are on the list? If not, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Hayes.
Well, the next item on the agenda is the priority list, and I think you've gone over that as far as how we arrived at the various priorities that we have on there. Are there any questions from any of the county commissioners on the priorities? Because another thing I would throw in is that what is critical here is when you look long range at the building, like you mentioned, Jonathan, about the newest elementary school that would be, say, in the Porter's Neck area, which would greatly take care of problems. At, say, Wrightsville Beach, for example, it all kind of hinges together. Wrightsville Beach, with this school would be effective because then with redistricting and so forth.
Don, can you speak up?
I'm sorry. With College, Bradley Creek, the northern school in particular, because then it also helps as far as the traffic on Market Street, because now all the children up in the Porter's Neck area up in there attend school at Blair. Ogden is closer to them, but that fills up with the Middle Sound area, that area in there, so therefore they're still going down there. It would take, it would help us, education, to have a school up there because we can fill it up in that area. Then also, it would be a while even when we start building because you've got to have some swing sites, a couple of swing sites like we did before when we were building Castle Hayne and some of these other schools. But the situation at Wrightsville Beach, for example, where we're using a church, it's going to eliminate all of that. It would give us the capacity we need because, as Dr. Markley stated, we're now over 26,000. And we never approached that before. We had been declining a little. But when you look at the increased enrollment and the demands placed on the system as far as technology in a lot of various areas that weren't around in the 60s, and it's grown. I don't know that when Hoggard and Laney were built, if they could ever get the student body in there from day one, actually in the gym. But are there any questions on any of the priorities? Because I guess the point I want to make is a lot of it is just kind of hinged together, because even when you build the school, it might be a year or so before the students in that area would actually be assigned there, because you might have to use that when we're replacing this school, for example. We've got to send these children somewhere. Blair, Pine Valley, the same thing.
I would tell you, as you look at this list, a lot of what's on this list is not new construction. A lot of it's fixing issues that we've had to let go because of capital needs. A lot of it's upgrades due to changes in technology. And some of them are just building upgrades that have needed to take place. So there is some new construction, but there's a lot of upgrade and renovation to things like HVAC systems and other things that we've deferred, that we've simply run out of time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
When your board, Don, updated the priorities list in July, were the increased cost of the security issues that came out of the school security and safety survey, which we attended and heard all of those suggestions, were those included in these figures?
The recommendations put forth by that,
Right.
that's from day one.
There was some readjustments based on security, but we also set aside $1 million of our fund balance coming into this year to make some adjustments related to security.
Based on those recommendations?
And then part of the July adjustment also was, we were able to do some projects with lottery funds, and honestly, the capital fund we got this year allowed us to do a little bit of readjusting in July as well.
So you've already started implementing some of those suggestions?
Yes.
See, plus also, I think when you look at the Castle Hayne Elementary School, the way it's constructed with the, you can actually have a system there, I think they call it a Sally Port area. I had to get around to where I throw that in. Right, Ms. Coble? But your security is kind of built in there, and it's easier, certainly much easier there to control that type of situation as far as security versus a school like this or some of the other ones. So all those, we're trying to implement those things, particularly those that don't cost money. It's just in our normal everyday routine as far as operation of the schools.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. But as you'll see on page, well, after tab, I guess that's 3. The updated list, and we have talked about, well, just depending upon this discussion today and then what comes out of this, how far down the list, we would go to determine an amount, and then also to determine a timeline. Because I think from Mr. Hance, from day one, when ground is broken, say on a new school up in the Porter's Neck area, we're looking, 2 years?
Looking about 3 years, roughly.
Before that would be
Design,
completed.
2.5 to 3 years, design and then construction.
And it'll really impact, because we can't use it for that area until what has to work together is what we're going to do here, what we're going to do at Riceville Beach, because that's also included as far as renovation, adding classrooms. We're not going to increase because we'd have to go up. And I don't think they really want the number increased, but it would be adequate to take care of the children that live down there. But everything has to work together as far as the renovation here and what Blair would tie in with the new school up there, because it would be another couple of years until we could actually put the children in Porter's Neck in that school based upon having to use it for a swing site. If we build it, then move, say, for example, all these children up there while we redo this one. Then put those back in here, then move Blair, for example, up there like we did before with Winter Park and some of the others when we had Blunt and some schools like that we could use for a swing site.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Just to clarify, if I understood Ms. Dawson's question, I think she's right in looking at this list we have, and certainly the new schools will have better safety features than the schools they're replacing. But to your point, this list was made before we had the school safety audit, and that if you look at this list, the majority of these projects are just delayed infrastructure needs and do not directly address safety issues. Now, you all did attend that meeting, and I thank you all for being there so you understand the scope of the problem. But from that meeting, as you saw, we could spend hundreds of millions of dollars just on safety concerns and not address a single other of the roof problems, the other infrastructure needs. So to your point, this is a bare bones list that really didn't directly incorporate the safety issues that you raised.
Thank you.
Then there are certain things even with renovations like to Hoggard and Laney, you can't correct all the safety issues there. You just can't. The office is where the office is, and that's not in here. Correct me if I'm wrong. So those will still exist. We can't replace every window. We are replacing doors as best we can.
Panic locks, as well as some of the small facility recommendations that came out of those reports, or some of those.
But, some of the bigger things, we don't have the funds to, blow up the office and replace it and, put a Sally port in those schools. That's not in here.
And even with all of this that we're asking for or looking at, doesn't address all of the 80-some mobile classrooms that we have, because we won't be able to give them up. And there's where the security is really a problem. We do have restrooms now in most of them, but still the children have to come and go for lunch and for the media center and for different activities. And of course, that they're not always the best air quality. That's costly. That's very concerning to the parents. So these are the things that we really have to think about, because times are not going to get any better.
Any other questions that, as far as the priorities that we have listed? I know today was basically just a discussion to present our needs. Of course, we've been, I'd like for the public to know, we have been meeting, Chairman White, Vice Chair Dawson and I, and Ms. Nichols and Ms. Eastep and other members of the board. We have been meeting, try to do it monthly, and I think those meetings have been very informative and beneficial to everyone. So I think there's an awareness, of the needs that exist. So how would we want to go about scheduling, Dr. Markley, another meeting or something for discussion as far as amount and timeline? And
well, at this point, that's the next two items on the agenda, is discussing about the amount.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we would hold I don't expect us to come to a decision necessarily on the amount, but maybe some general discussion about where we're at.
Well, was it my understanding that next year, 2014, in November, the general election, is that the time frame? I think that I know various times have been discussed, just like various amounts have been discussed. This shows, 25 items. We had cut it back. Of course, if you're so inclined, we can add to it. But I know, as I've always said, I don't envy county commissioners, in that I know there's a lot in the county to fund, a lot of different entities that come to y'all for funds and so forth. But I think it's in the presentation Dr. Markley made, we have deferred a lot of our maintenance, and unfortunately every now and then we have to do something like this to kind of play catch up.
And in terms of timing, as you start looking at public school debt, our bonds are going to start coming off the books in fairly large chunks over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of how much of the bond issues are school related. I mean, it's going to drop from $21 million in 11-12 to 13-14 is going to be just over $20 million in terms of what's school debt, and that number will continue to go down every year as you move forward. And I understand community college debt's coming on, we have to look at that, but if you look at the county's overall bond picture, with the school debt coming off, it's going to balance out somewhat in terms of what you're looking at for your total debt picture.
Well, one thing I would say is that I think we're all committed to making sure that our students have the best environment to learn in. And I would assume, based on me having a daughter that went to Mary C. Williams, as you build a new school there, it's going to raise morale, not just for the teachers, but for the students as well. I think that brings pride in where you are, which I think would foster better test scores as well, as you're proud of where you are. I've had kids in almost the majority of the schools in terms of elementary schools. And it's a very big difference between this school and the Holly Tree. this school and Cotton, it would be great if we could have equity within all the schools, so that all the kids have a great place to be. And safety is gonna be a really big concern about as well to move forward, just to make sure that we're doing all that we can to make every school as safe as possible. And that was my question for why you're gonna build up as opposed to out, to make sure that you don't have a lot of pods around the building as you move forward.
The disadvantage of building up is that our primary children cannot go upstairs. So that limits when you have
Well,
to.
third and fourth graders, third, fourth, and fifth graders can.
Primary children
Right,
cannot,
right.
but elementary can. There's a difference.
Well, the kindergarten, first, and second graders have to
Cannot
be
go
on the
upstairs.
first floor, but I mean, third, fourth, and fifth graders can be on the second floor.
And get heard. The wisdom from the state.
But it makes sense for safety again.
And it's a lot cheaper than it is out.
Small steps.
But I'd like to say too, and Mrs. Green was talking about the wiring, at least they're wireless. Thanks to the Board of Commissioners, because the last 2 years you gave us that $750,000, and we are completely wireless now in all of our schools. So we really appreciate that kind of support.
Sure, I guess we're following the 7 habits that are up there.
Trying to, yes.
Mostly the
But you know, you make a good
Mostly the
point.
win-win one.
But you make a good point, Mr. Barfield, when you talk about the equity and so forth, and as schools are replaced, because you see that at Castle Hayne, for example, you mentioned Holly Tree, Coddington, Eaton, they were all passed bonds that allowed us to do that, which then certainly increased the technology. And as we go through the system, you're right, then it's going to bring the others up to that point, and that's what we're attempting to do.
Well, not only that, I would just add that, from an economic development standpoint, the nicer our schools are, the nicer our schools are, sort of attracts, we want to attract families into our community, and as our community grows, that's something that they look at, families consider when they look to move to Wilmington. Do they have, quality schools that are safe? So that's something to consider as well.
And I'd like to compliment, was it Aaron, Dr. Markle, who came up with the idea for the analogy of the school system and the bridge?
That was there.
Very good analogy, because if I remember correctly, that bridge, wasn't it obsolete when they built it? Wasn't even supposed to go here, if I remember. I think it's supposed to go to Savannah or something. They didn't, so they brought it here.
And part of the analogy is when that bridge was built, it was already out of date in terms
Yeah.
of capacity. Even if we built everything on this list and do every renovation on this list, given the time frame and the growth we have, we're still not going to catch up with all of our growth. This bond doesn't put us ahead of growth. It catches up for old growth, maybe gets us a little breathing room. Because as I think Ms. Nichols said, the trailers, we may reduce the number of trailers, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to eliminate all 80 of those trailers.
And one thing, the past bond referendums that have been put forth have always been strongly supported by the community. I don't know that we've ever, of course we haven't had that many, ever had problems with the citizens in Unity County passing a bond, for schools for their children. I mean, that's our presentation. Chairman White, if y'all want to, I guess, discuss among yourselves at your meetings, because I know you're familiar with the overall indebtedness of the county, and of course y'all have concerns there, and we certainly understand that. But our intent is to make you aware of what the needs, our needs are, and the time frame, and how so much of this is kind of locked in, that builds upon, one thing builds upon another. But we have to, do something in some of these areas and get those kids in Wrightsville Beach, for example, out of the church and back into a classroom, the Porter's Neck area, and I know the congestion on Market Street, because that school where we're looking at up there, we can fill it up and a bus never have to go out on Market Street, and that'll be quite a an accomplishment, I think. If I were a parent up there and my child's riding from Porter's Neck all the way down to Blair, to think that they don't have to do that, that's a safety concern.
The other aspect is we're seeing construction numbers starting to pick up, so that probably will translate to us a higher cost. So the longer we delay, the longer we wait, we're going to see the cost numbers for these projects go up.
I want to thank you for the presentation. We've known a lot of this. We've been working diligently together for a long time. We have a long-standing history, as Chairman Hayes referenced, of working together and serving the needs of our growing public student population. We'll continue to do that. Are there any questions or comments from members of our board? Mr. Kudray.
Well, is the total, the bottom of this updated July 2nd report, the $280 million, is that?
$242 million in current dollars, and that's if you inflate it out over including fees and construction costs, cumulative cost by the time you're all done is $280 million.
So that's the amount of the bond that you would request the bond be?
Well, part of that would depend upon when you would issue bonds and when we would schedule projects. So depending upon when the debt's issued, that number, that's not a hard number, but it's based on a schedule that a preliminary schedule we've worked out, that would be the number.
Thank you.
It does bear mentioning, too, to remind the citizens that Mike can hear some of what we're saying, and that are in attendance today, that we've committed to fund the new priority, the new elementary school in the northern part of the county fully, we hope, over the next 3 years from our existing budget. And we hope that over time we will move towards more of a pay-as-you-go. When you compare our debt to Buncombe County, for example, almost identical student population, more people, but almost the same students, their debt is half of ours for school construction. So they're doing something extremely efficiently. And so what they probably did, I'm speculating, is years ago they made a decision to try to pay as you go and not delay and borrow all the time. Understanding we're always going to be in the debt business and we'll continue to do so because rates are good. But it does bear repeating that we have made that commitment, and I think you guys are looking at some land and may be moving on that at some point. And we've committed to try to not delay whatever the voters might consider and might do next year. We hope this elementary school is going to go under design and start being built regardless of bond numbers or time or anything. And that's a commitment that we made early this year with you guys and working in conjunction and collaboration with you. And looking over the next 5 or 10 years, we hope that's a model we can continue to follow. We see the other need of the other elementary school. So I think that needed to be remind folks.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Mr.
just may
Goodray.
make the one administrative comment, and no question the amount and the time are the boards to negotiate and plan for, but keep in mind that you have debt management policies to be mindful of, that both the amount is affected by the time and the amount that you issue. Whether you issue 100 or 150 or 200, you're going to have to keep in mind the fact that your debt management policy limits per capita debt, and that's all per capita debt inclusive of schools and other things of $2,200. 1.6 debt to assessed value, so we don't have more than 1.6% of our assessed value outstanding as debt, and then 20% of our general fund obligations being limited to debt service.
Right. You're at 1.1 right now in your debt to assess. I think you're at about 2,000 on your per capita debt. So you're under both your goal numbers.
But there are other obligations to come forward. So I would just ask that both boards keep those overarching goals in mind as you agree to both a time and an amount.
Any other questions or comments from members of our board? Well, this was very helpful, Tim, and Principal Green, if you're still here. The tour was tremendous. We appreciate that. That's when we see the needs up close and personal, and that was very helpful for us.
Thank you, Chairman White. If there are no other questions, I think that takes us to the bottom. Anything else, Dr. Markley, that completes our agenda items.
We talked about amount, I didn't know if you wanted any discussion about in terms of timeline.
Well, the only thing I had mentioned was I thinking from our past conversations that possibly considering next year, but Chairman White, if you
Yeah, I think there's a general agreement that next year in a general election where the most voters and the most citizens will be actively engaged in participating. I think that's a general, till we take formal action at some point in the future, but that's, from what I understand from the other commissioners, the consensus that we're looking to.
From our board, any other comments, any questions, anything, any closing thoughts?
What does that do for our timeline? When do we need to make the next decision, come up with a number? When do we need to do all that?
What do we need to do?
Well, when do we need to come to an agreement, hard and fast, this is what we're going to do?
Well, if we were thinking, say, in the November election of 2014, I think that in the past, Mr. Higgins, in previous bonds, say 6 months was?
No more than 6 months, no more than 6 months. The last bond issue, I think we did for 3, maybe 4 months, because
Put it out and then.
Put it out, and, once everything had been done and it had been approved and the amount had been established, we had about 3 to 3.5 months to speak to it. Because, as you said, the people of New Hanover County have historically and traditionally been very supportive of the educational system in this county. I think what we have done here, like we have done in the past, we have listed specific projects. It is not just an open-ended, give us X number of dollars and we're going to go out and spend it. These are specific projects that we plan to do. And I think that's what we have done the last 2 times we have come to the county asking for permission to do this bond, to get a bond issue. And I think people are very responsive to seeing what projects are going to be done, plus the fact that we can demonstrate that in the past, the school system has been very efficient in using the funds that have been furnished to get the projects completed. I think Ogden may be a good example that we've had a couple of schools where we have actually had money left over and were able to build additional schools from the savings that Mr. Hance and his group were able to generate out of those. So I'd say, no more than 6, 4 to 6 months would be sufficient.
Did that answer your question, Ms. Easton?
Chairman White and members of the board, what do you want us to do from here? Do you need anything else from us? What else do you need to see? Or where do you want to go with this?
Well, Ms. Eastep, we're not prepared to make a decision today, if that's what your question is.
No, I'm asking going forward timeline.
Yeah,
really.
Chris hasn't.
I'll restate what we said. What I think the consensus is that A, we hope that it will be on the ballot next fall in the general election, and B, that we have taken in a lot of information over the last 10 months that we have to consider in conjunction with our other debt management obligations, and we will do that in due course, and with every reason to believe that it's going to be agreeable to your board.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the commissioners for being here. I'd like to move to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
And I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any objection? Hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.